Mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing a lease agreement for a client. I almost didn't pick up. I should have trusted that instinct. Sweetheart, she said, and I already knew something was wrong because she only used that word when she wanted something. Your father and I have been talking. With everything going on with your brother's situation right now, we think it would be best if you postponed your engagement party. I set down my pen. Postponed it, I repeated. Just by a few months. You know how stressful things have been for Donovan. The investors pulled out last week and he's barely holding it together. You wouldn't want your celebration overshadowing everything he's dealing with. Donovan, my older brother, 34 years old, perpetually on the verge of his next big breakthrough, perpetually in need of everyone else's resources to get there. Mom, I said, Gideon and I have had this date set for 4 months. I know, but think about the family optics. If you're throwing a party while Donovan is struggling, it sends a message. What message? A pause. Then, that you don't care about your brother. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside my window, a woman was walking her dog down the street, completely unbothered. Living a life where her engagement party had not just been asked to move aside for a 34-year-old man who had been struggling with one thing or another for as long as I could remember. I'll talk to Gideon, I said. And I hung up. Have you ever been told that your happiness is an inconvenience? Leave a comment. I want to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old, and I spent the first 28 years of my life believing that my role in this family was to be the responsible one. The quiet one. The one who made sure everything ran smoothly so that Donovan could take up all the space he needed to become the person my parents were certain he was going to be. It started young. I was 9 when my parents missed my school concert to attend Donovan's baseball tryouts. He didn't even make the team. I was 12 when they took out a personal loan to fund his first business venture, a pressure washing company that lasted 1 summer. I was 16 when I got a part-time job at a coffee shop and started contributing to the grocery bill, not because we were poor, but because my parents had quietly rerouted most of their discretionary income into Donovan's various endeavors, and there wasn't much left over for things like, say, food. I didn't resent it then the way I should have. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Donovan would eventually find his footing. I told myself that one day my parents would look at me and see what I had built and be proud. The engagement party call was not the first time I'd been asked to shrink myself for my brother, but it was the last. After I hung up, I sat very still at my desk for about 3 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up a real estate listing I had been quietly monitoring for 6 weeks. You see, Gideon is not a handyman. He is not a small-time contractor or a weekend fixer-upper. Gideon runs a boutique commercial real estate firm that specializes in acquiring and repositioning underperforming hospitality properties, bars, event venues, private dining spaces. He has a very specific eye for them. 3 months earlier, he had mentioned almost offhandedly over dinner that he was looking at a venue called the Alderton House, a converted Victorian manor on the edge of town that had been operating as a mid-range event space for about a decade and was quietly hemorrhaging money. The owner wanted out. The bones were extraordinary. My parents had always called Gideon the contractor at family dinners. Polite enough, but loaded. As in, he works with his hands, not his mind. As in, are you sure this is the best you can do, Sloane? Ewan had signed the purchase agreement for the Alderton house 11 days before my mother's phone call. She didn't know that, and she certainly didn't know what I did for a living. My parents knew I worked in finance. They had never asked for specifics. To them, finance meant I sat in an office and moved numbers around for other people. Respectable enough, but not impressive. Not like Donovan, who was always one deal away from changing everything. What I actually do is work as a forensic accountant for a regional firm that gets called in when things go wrong. Insurance fraud, business litigation, the occasional criminal referral. I spend my days finding the things people tried to hide inside financial records. I am very good at it. I had never used that skill set on my own family. Until now. The call from my mother was on a Tuesday. By Thursday evening, I had pulled every public record I could find connected to Donovan's current situation. He had mentioned an investor dispute at the last family dinner. My mother had framed it as a minor setback caused by difficult partners. I wanted to understand what I was actually dealing with. The picture that emerged was not flattering. Donovan had incorporated an LLC 18 months ago under a name I didn't recognize. The registered agent address was a mailbox service. He had taken on two outside investors for a total of $180,000, and based on the filings I could access, he had reported almost no operational activity, the kind of inactivity that doesn't match with what he'd been telling the family. That the business was growing, that he just needed a little more runway, that the investors were the problem for getting cold feet. I made a few calls. One of the investors had already hired an attorney. I sat with that information for a while. Then I called my brother. "I've been thinking," I said, "and you're right that the timing of the engagement party is awkward. Gideon and I are going to keep the date. But why don't we do a joint family dinner the week before, something lower key, just the five of us? We can celebrate together and it won't feel like you're being overshadowed." He accepted immediately. He sounded relieved. He probably thought I had caved. I had not caved. I had not caved. I had just chosen my battlefield. The escalation came 10 days later, which I had not entirely predicted, but also was not surprised by. My mother called again, this time with my father on the line. They wanted to talk about the engagement party venue. Specifically, they had heard through someone, they didn't say who, that Gideon had acquired the Alderton house, and they had a proposition. "We thought it would be so meaningful," my mother said, "if you held the party there. As a family venue, in a sense, a soft launch for the space." "That's Gideon's business property," I said carefully. "Exactly," my father cut in. His voice had that quality it always got when he was presenting something manipulative as reasonable, which is why it would be a wonderful opportunity to show the community what he can do with it. "And we were thinking, while you're coordinating the event anyway, you could let Donovan handle the vendor side. He has relationships with caterers, with musicians. It would give him something to work toward, help him get back on his feet." I let the silence sit for a beat. "You want Donovan to run the vendor coordination for our engagement party," I said, "at a venue Gideon owns. Think of it as a collaboration," my mother said brightly. "And who's paying for it?" Another pause. "Well, we thought perhaps Gideon might absorb some of the cost, given that it would also serve as a showcase for the venue." I almost laughed. They wanted Gideon to fund an event that would employ my brother and double as a marketing tool for a business they had spent 2 years dismissing as beneath me. "I'll talk to Gideon," I said again. I did talk to Gideon. He found the whole thing so perfectly on brand for my family that he had to leave the room to laugh, so I wouldn't feel bad about it. Then we made a different plan entirely. 3 days before the family dinner I had proposed, Donovan called me. He sounded different, quieter. He asked if I had heard anything from a woman named Patrice. Said it as if the name meant nothing, but I could hear the tension underneath it. I said I hadn't, which was technically true. Patrice was one of the two investors. Her attorney had filed a formal complaint with the state. I knew this because I very quietly made an introduction between her and a colleague of mine who specialized in business litigation. Not as a referral exactly, more as a courtesy. Donovan said everything was fine. He said the investors were just difficult people. He said he had it handled. I said I was glad to hear it. What I did not say was that I had spent the previous weekend going through 3 years of joint family financial records that my parents, in a moment of misguided trust, had once shared with me during a refinancing conversation. They had wanted my opinion on their home equity situation. I had given it to them at the time. What I had also done, quietly, was note certain patterns. The more I looked, the clearer the picture became. Over the past 2 years, my parents had liquidated a significant portion of their retirement savings, not all at once, which would have been visible. In increments, rolled into a joint account that then showed transfers to an entity I recognized as Donovan's LLC. They had not told me this. They had mentioned, periodically, that they were helping Donovan bridge a gap. I had not understood the scale. When I added it up, it was over $90,000. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night and looked at that number for a very long time. My parents were both in their early 60s. They were not wealthy. Their home was their primary asset. Their retirement accounts were supposed to carry them through the next 30 years. They had handed $90,000 to a man who was currently the subject of a formal investor complaint and who had built his primary revenue stream on relationships that were either fictional or actively hostile. And they had asked me to postpone my engagement party so as not to overshadow him. The family dinner was at my parents' house. My mother had made the pot roast she made for every significant occasion, and the table was set with the good china, which only appeared when Donovan was in attendance. I had noticed that pattern years ago and stopped being hurt by it. Gideon wore a jacket. He always did for family events, even knowing how my family received him. He is quietly the most dignified person I have ever met. Donovan arrived 20 minutes late and immediately began talking about a new opportunity he was exploring. Real estate adjacent, he said meaningfully, with a glance at Gideon. A hospitality concept. He had some interested parties. My father nodded along. My mother refilled his wine glass. I ate my pot roast and said very little. After dinner, while my mother was bringing out dessert, Donovan leaned back in his chair and addressed Gideon directly for the first time all evening. "So the Aldridgen property?" he said. "What's your vision for it?" Gideon smiled pleasantly. "Event space, private dining, corporate and social." "Interesting." Donovan swirled his wine. "Because I've been talking to some people who do high-end hospitality consulting. There might be value in bringing in outside expertise. I can make an introduction." "That's kind of you," Gideon said. "I'm serious. The right consultants can make or break a venue like that. You don't want to go in blind just because you know the real estate side." My father made a sound of agreement. My mother nodded, and something in me went very still. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. I set down my fork. "Donovan," I said, "how are things going with Patrice?" The table went quiet. He looked at me. The pleasantness in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I told you that's handled. She filed a formal complaint," I said, "with the state 2 weeks ago." My father looked at Donovan. My mother's hand stopped moving. "Sloane," my father started. "I'm not trying to start anything," I said, and I meant it. My voice was completely level. "I'm saying it because I think we need to actually talk about what's happening. Mom, Dad, I know you've been transferring money to Donovan's LLC. I've seen the pattern. Over the past 2 years, it's been roughly $90,000. The silence was different now. My mother looked at Donovan. My father looked at the table. "You went through our finances," Donovan said. "You showed me your finances," I said, looking at my parents. 2 years ago, when you were thinking about refinancing, I've thought about what I saw many times since then, and then over the past few weeks, I started putting the full picture together." "This is an ambush," Donovan said. He pushed back from the table slightly. "It's a dinner," I said. "The ambush is what's already happening to Mom and Dad's retirement. I want to know if they understand what they've sent $90,000 toward." My father's voice was careful. Donovan explained the business model. "The 2 investors who put in $180,000 believe the business model was misrepresented to them," I said. "One of them has an attorney? That's not my opinion. That's a filed document." My mother's eyes had filled, though I couldn't tell if it was anger or something else. "You've always resented your brother," she said very quietly. I looked at her. I had expected this, and I still felt it land somewhere. "I've spent 15 years watching you fund every idea he's ever had," I said. "I've never asked you for anything. I found my own way. I built something, and when I tried to celebrate one moment of it, you asked me to wait, because his investor issue was more important than my engagement party. I didn't say anything then because I didn't want to make a scene, but I'm done waiting for the scene to be convenient for everyone else." Donovan stood up. "I don't have to listen to this," he said. "Sit down," my father said, quietly, but in a voice that did not leave room for argument. Donovan sat. There was a long silence. The pot roast was getting cold. The good china sat there under the dining room light, looking ceremonial and sad. "How much?" my father finally asked. "Not to me, to Donovan." Donovan looked at the table. "How much of what they gave you was actually in the business?" my father said. His voice was steady, in the way voices get when steadiness is the only thing left. And slowly, bit by bit, it came apart. Not dramatically. Not with shouting. Just with the quiet collapse of a story that had stopped being sustainable. Investors had been told projections that Donovan had not been able to support. The operating account had funded expenses my parents didn't know about. Some of the money was gone in ways that were difficult to characterize cleanly. Donovan kept using the word technically in a way that told me everything I needed to know about where the lines had been. My father aged about 5 years in the next 20 minutes. My mother stopped crying and went somewhere else inside herself that I recognized. She had a way of doing that, of just going quiet and still and processing everything from a distance because it was too much to process up close. Before I left, I pulled out a folder. It contained a referral to a financial advisor I trusted, a 1-page summary of the investor complaint timeline, and the name and number of an attorney who handled civil disputes and had agreed to give my parents an initial consultation at no charge as a professional courtesy, at no charge as a professional courtesy. I set it on the table next to the pot roast. I'm not the enemy, I said. I'm the person who's been paying attention. Donovan didn't speak to me as I put on my coat. Gideon held the door. We walked to the car in the cool evening air, and I didn't cry until we turned out of the neighborhood. Not from sadness exactly, from something more complicated than that. From the particular exhaustion of having been right about something you spent years hoping you were wrong about. 3 months later, the investor complaint resulted in a civil judgment. Donovan settled. The terms were not public, but the resolution required liquidating assets. He moved back into my parents' house for a period of time that I understood was going to be longer than anyone was officially acknowledging. Gideon opened the Alderton house in the spring. It was extraordinary. He had brought in a local architect to restore the original plasterwork and a culinary team that had been looking for the right space for 2 years. The opening night was full. There were people standing in the garden drinking champagne under string lights, and I stood in the middle of it and thought about the phone call from my mother on that Tuesday afternoon asking me to postpone. My engagement party was held in the main hall 2 weeks after opening night. My parents came. My mother wore a dress I hadn't seen before and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. We have not fully repaired things. I don't know if we will completely. What we have instead is something more honest than what came before it. My mother has started asking me questions about my work. Real questions, not polite ones. My father sat down with a financial advisor and has started a recovery plan that is modest but workable. Donovan is figuring out what comes next for him. I hope genuinely that he finds it. Not because I owe him hope, but because he is still my brother. And I have come to understand that people who are endlessly propped up and told they are exceptional sometimes never learn to actually become it. The cruelty was never really mine to repay. It was his to reckon with. As for Gideon, he texted me this morning a photo of the weekend booking calendar for the Alderton house. It is full through August. The contractor my mother used to call him, with that particular tone. She called him by his name at the engagement party. Just Gideon. Like a person. That might be the smallest thing I'm telling you about. It's also the one I keep coming back to. If you have a family that has always seen you clearly, you may not know what a gift that is. And if you have a family that hasn't, I hope you know that you are allowed to stop arranging yourself around their version of you. You are allowed to take up the space you actually occupy. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And you definitely don't have to cancel your engagement party. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to pay attention. Not the polite kind of attention, where you notice things and then look away because looking feels impolite. The real kind. The kind that costs you something. For years, I paid polite attention to my family. I noticed the patterns and I filed them away, and I told myself it wasn't my business, or that things would correct themselves, or that I was too close to see clearly. None of those things were true. I was just afraid of what I would have to do if I admitted what I actually saw. What finally changed for me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. Because I think people expect a story like mine to be driven by rage, by some breaking point where everything boils over. But the Tuesday afternoon phone call from my mother didn't make me angry. It made me tired. Tired in the specific way you get tired when something has been true for a long time and you've been spending enormous energy pretending it isn't. The moment I stopped pretending, everything else became very simple. I think about Donovan, and I genuinely don't believe he's a bad person at his core. I think he is someone who was told, for so long, that he was exceptional, that he never developed the muscle you need to actually become exceptional. That muscle only grows under resistance. It grows when things don't go your way, and you have to figure out why. It grows when no one comes to rescue you, and you have to rescue yourself. My brother never had to grow that muscle because there was always someone ready to absorb the consequences before they could reach him. That's not love. That's a kind of harm dressed up as love, and it's one of the most common kinds there is. My parents are not villains either. They made choices out of fear and out of hope, which is where most bad decisions come from. They were afraid that if they didn't prop Donovan up, he would fail, and his failure would mean something about them. So they kept propping. They kept hoping. They sent $90,000 into a situation they didn't understand because understanding it would have required admitting they'd been wrong about the story they built their lives around. What I've learned, sitting with all of this over the past year, is that integrity is not a dramatic thing. It doesn't announce itself. It's mostly just the accumulation of small choices to see things clearly and act on what you see, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the people across the table from you would rather you didn't. The night of that family dinner, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform anything. I just put the information on the table and let it be what it was. That's all intelligence ever really is in the end. Not cleverness, not credentials, just the willingness to look directly at a thing and call it by its right name. And resilience, the thing I'm most grateful for having built, is not the ability to endure. It's the ability to rebuild. After every phone call, every dinner, every moment of being told I was less, I went home and I kept working. I kept building, not to prove something to them, just because it was mine to build. The Alderton house opened full on a spring evening, and Gideon texted me a photo of the booking calendar, and I sat in our kitchen and thought, this is what it looks like when no one gives it to you. This is what it looks like when you earn it in full. I don't think the universe keeps score in any organized way, but I do think that what you put your energy toward tends to grow. Donovan put his energy toward appearing successful. I put mine toward being useful. Those two things look similar from a distance and feel completely different up close. If you're in a family that has consistently asked you to be smaller, I want you to hear this. Your careful attention to your own life is not selfishness. Your refusal to set yourself aside is not cruelty. The people who benefited most from your smallness will call it both of those things. That doesn't make it true. You're allowed to take up the space you actually occupy, and then a little more, just to make up for lost time.